The footage from the motion-activated camera shows everything I needed to see after 7 years of searching. 2 small figures walking through the dense Washington wilderness alongside a massive dark shape that moves with fluid, purposeful grace through the underbrush. The children wear matching red jackets, the same jackets my twin sons Marcus and Michael were wearing when they vanished on that November morning in 2001. They walk calmly beside the towering creature, showing no fear or distress, moving with the unhurried confidence of children who have found their place in a world that shouldn't exist. What you're about to hear is the true account of that autumn day, and the evidence I've gathered since then that proves my boys weren't lost, weren't taken by a human predator, and aren't dead. They were adopted by something that the world dismisses as mythology, something that science refuses to acknowledge, something that I now know with absolute certainty lives in the deepest wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. My name is Richard, and this is the story of how I lost my twin sons to the forest and how I'm determined to find them again. November 17th, 2001 began as a perfect autumn morning for our annual camping trip to the Olympic National Forest. The Washington wilderness stretched endlessly around us, carpeted with fallen leaves in shades of gold and crimson that crunched beneath our boots as we ventured deeper into territory that felt ancient and untouched by modern civilization. Marcus and Michael, my energetic 7-year-old twins, bounded ahead through the underbrush, their excitement infectious as they competed to spot the most interesting mushrooms, the strangest rock formations, the tallest trees. We'd made this camping trip every year since the boys were old enough to walk, a father-son's tradition that meant everything to all 3 of us. My wife had passed away from cancer when the twins were just 4 years old, and these wilderness adventures had become our way of healing together, of building memories that honored her love of the outdoors while forging our own path forward as a family. Marcus and Michael were inseparable in the way that only identical twins can be. They shared not just their dark curly hair and bright green eyes, but an almost supernatural connection that allowed them to finish each other's sentences, know when the other was hurt or scared, and communicate in ways that seemed to transcend normal understanding. Their teachers at school often commented on how the boys seemed to operate as a single unit, thinking and moving in perfect synchronization. At home, when they weren't exploring the woods behind our house, they spent hours watching nature documentaries together, dreaming of the creatures they might encounter in the wild. Their fascination with wildlife had earned them matching nicknames among our friends and family. Marcus was called Wolf Boy because of his love for canines, while Michael was dubbed Bear Cub for his fascination with the powerful creatures that roamed the forests we visited. That morning, both boys carried small backpacks filled with the supplies they'd carefully selected for our 3-day camping adventure. Marcus had packed his compass, his favorite wildlife identification book, and the small knife I'd given him for his 7th birthday. Michael carried binoculars, a notebook for sketching the animals he hoped to see, and a flashlight for exploring after dark. Their cheeks were flushed from the cool autumn air, their eyes bright with the pure joy that only children possess when surrounded by natural wonder. The forest felt magical that day, ancient evergreens towering above us while deciduous trees painted the understory in brilliant autumn colors. Shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating patterns on the forest floor that seemed almost deliberately artistic. We had obtained a backcountry permit that allowed us to camp far from the usual spots where other families gathered. And the deeper we went, the more pristine and untouched the wilderness became. 3 hours into our hike, Marcus spotted something that would change our lives forever. A set of tracks in the soft earth near a stream unlike anything I'd ever seen in my 20 years of wilderness experience. They were enormous, easily twice the size of my own footprints, pressed deep into the mud in a way that suggested whatever made them carried immense weight. The stride length was impossible for any human, each step covering nearly 5 feet of ground. Each print measured roughly 17 inches long and 7 inches wide, with what appeared to be distinct toe impressions clearly visible in the soft soil. The tracks led away from the stream and deeper into the forest, disappearing into a section of woods so dense that the canopy blocked most of the afternoon sunlight. Something primal in my gut screamed danger when I looked at those tracks. These weren't bear prints, and I'd seen plenty of those over the years of camping in these mountains. They weren't from any known animal in this region. They were something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist, but had clearly passed through just hours before our arrival. The edges of the prints were still sharp and well-defined, indicating they were fresh, probably made that very morning. I knelt down to examine them more closely, running my fingers along the deep impressions while my mind raced through every possible explanation. Nothing fit, nothing made sense. Marcus and Michael were mesmerized by the discovery. Their young minds interpreted the mysterious tracks as an exciting puzzle to solve, rather than a warning to flee. They circled the prints like tiny detectives, comparing the size to their own feet, speculating about what kind of creature could possibly have made them. Marcus suggested it might be a bear walking on its hind legs, while Michael countered that no bear could have such long toes or such a human-like stride pattern. Before I could stop them, they were following the trail together, calling back that they wanted to see where the tracks led. I should have grabbed them right then. Should have picked them both up, one under each arm, and carried them back to the truck without a backward glance. But the boys were already 50 yards ahead, their small figures darting between the trees with the fearless enthusiasm of childhood. My brother James, who had joined us for the expedition, urged me to let the boys explore while we set up the campsite. They had their whistles, he reminded me. They knew to blow 3 times if they got scared or lost, and we could hear their excited chatter drifting back through the trees, proof that they were fine, just exploring the way children should be allowed to explore. Within minutes, Marcus and Michael had disappeared from sight, swallowed by the ancient forest that suddenly felt more like a predator than a playground. Their voices faded as they moved deeper into the woods, still following those impossible tracks that led toward a section of the forest I'd never explored before. At first, we assumed the twins were just beyond the next cluster of trees, focused on whatever fascinating discovery had captured their attention. But then the responses stopped. The forest fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the autumn leaves. Our calls for Marcus and Michael echoed through the trees, growing more desperate with each unanswered shout. When we finally stopped what we were doing to actively search for the boys, the horrible realization hit us with the force of a physical blow. Marcus and Michael were nowhere to be found. We immediately began tracking the twins' footprints in the soft forest floor. Their trail was easy to follow at first. 2 sets of small, distinct boot prints leading deeper into the forest, following alongside those massive, inexplicable tracks we'd discovered earlier. But then, something happened that defied all logic and reason. About a quarter-mile from our campsite, the twins' footprints simply ended. Not gradually, as if they'd turned around or changed direction. They just stopped, both sets of prints ending at exactly the same spot, as if both boys had been lifted straight up into the air simultaneously and carried away. The enormous tracks continued for another 100 feet before disappearing into a rocky area where the ground was too hard to hold clear impressions. It was as if whatever creature had made those prints had taken both Marcus and Michael with it. We searched frantically as darkness fell. Near the spot where the twins' tracks had ended, we found something that chilled me more than the November cold. A strange formation in the fallen leaves, a circular pattern where the leaves had been deliberately arranged in a spiral design. The pattern was too perfect, too obviously artificial to be the result of wind or animal activity. 50 yards away, we discovered a makeshift shelter constructed from broken tree branches. The structure was sophisticated, far too advanced for frightened 7-year-old boys to have built. The branches used in construction were thick, some as wide as my arm, and several had been snapped cleanly in half, a feat that would have required immense strength. Whatever had constructed this shelter possessed both intelligence and physical power far beyond human capability. Word of the twins' disappearance spread quickly. Within hours, search and rescue teams had assembled, and by dawn, hundreds of volunteers had joined the effort, forming human chains that combed every inch of the terrain. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging technology swept the area from above, but the thermal scans showed nothing except the signatures of the search teams themselves and the normal wildlife of the forest. Search and rescue teams brought in specially trained dogs to try to pick up the twins' scent. But when brought to the area where Marcus and Michael's tracks had disappeared, they behaved in ways their handlers had never witnessed before. Instead of picking up a scent trail, the dogs became agitated and fearful. Several whimpered and backed away from the area, their tails tucked between their legs. Others began howling, not the purposeful baying of dogs on a trail, but something that sounded almost like terror or grief. One experienced handler admitted privately that she'd never seen anything like it. The dogs were clearly detecting something in that area, but whatever it was inspired fear rather than the hunting instinct these animals had been trained to follow. 3 of the dogs actually refused to enter the section of forest where the twins' tracks ended, despite repeated commands from their handlers. For 9 days, the search continued around the clock. But despite all the technology, all the manpower, all the prayers and hope and desperate searching, Marcus and Michael remained missing. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed them whole. On the 4th day of the search, volunteers made another discovery. Additional sets of the massive footprints were found in a muddy area near a small lake, about 3/4 of a mile from where the twins had last been seen. These prints were even clearer than the ones we'd originally found. A wildlife expert brought in to help with the search examined the prints extensively and declared them unlike anything in his 30 years of experience. The depth of the impressions suggested a creature weighing at least 500 pounds, yet the spacing indicated bipedal movement. The expert was visibly shaken by his analysis, and when pressed for an explanation, he could only shake his head and admit that he had no scientific framework for understanding what had made those tracks. Most significantly, mixed in with the massive prints were smaller tracks that could only have been made by children. 2 sets of small footprints walking side by side appeared intermittently along the trail, as if the children were being allowed to walk on their own for stretches before being carried again. The spacing of these smaller prints was normal, not rushed or panicked, suggesting that whoever was making them wasn't running or fleeing. After 9 days of intensive searching, officials made the heartbreaking decision to scale back the operation. The official search was suspended, though the case remained open, but my family refused to give up. We organized our own search parties, returning to the forest every weekend for months. We posted flyers throughout the region, offering a substantial reward for any information. Those weathered, faded flyers still hang on trees throughout the area, testaments to our refusal to abandon hope. About 6 weeks after the twins' disappearance, a hunter found several items that reignited the investigation. A small notebook that belonged to Michael was discovered several miles from where the boys had last been seen. The notebook contained several new pages filled with crude drawings of large figures, humanoid shapes with long arms and hair-covered bodies, standing near 2 smaller figures that could only represent Michael and his brother. The drawings were childish but unmistakably intentional, showing scenes that appeared to depict the boys interacting with these massive creatures. Found near the notebook was Marcus's compass. Most significantly, there were traces of some kind of organic material on both items, a substance that was later analyzed and found to contain proteins unlike anything in any database. The discovery of these items so far from the original search area proved that the twins had been transported. But the question remained, by whom or what? The breakthrough came 7 years later, in the autumn of 2008. A wildlife researcher had set up a network of trail cameras throughout the Olympic wilderness. One of her cameras, positioned in a remote area, captured footage that would change everything. The footage showed a massive humanoid creature walking upright through the forest. The being stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair, with arms that hung down past its knees and a bulk that suggested immense physical strength. Its movements were fluid and natural, not the awkward gait of a person in a costume, but the easy motion of a creature perfectly adapted to its environment. But what made the footage truly extraordinary was what walked beside it. Next to the enormous creature, matching its pace with easy familiarity, were 2 smaller figures. They appeared to be human adolescents, their faces partially obscured by the angle of the camera, but their body language clearly comfortable and unafraid. They wore what looked like handmade clothing, some kind of animal hide fashioned into simple garments. But over these garments were glimpses of red material, the unmistakable color of the matching jackets Marcus and Michael had been wearing. The children walked freely beside the creature, showing no signs of fear or restraint. Their movements were confident, their posture relaxed. At one point in the footage, one of the smaller figures reached up and touched the creature's enormous hand, a gesture of affection that made my heart simultaneously soar and break. When the footage was enhanced, the details became even more significant. The red material was identical to the fabric used in the twins' jackets. The body proportions of the smaller figures were consistent with 14-year-old boys, which is exactly how old Marcus and Michael would be. Most remarkably, the way the 2 smaller figures moved in relation to each other showed the unmistakable synchronization of identical twins. For 7 years I had avoided the obvious conclusion, but the evidence was overwhelming. The enormous footprints matched known casts of alleged Bigfoot tracks. The sophisticated shelter construction required strength and intelligence beyond normal human capability. The frightened reaction of the trained search dogs suggested they were detecting something that triggered their deepest survival instincts. The organic material found on Michael's notebook contained proteins that matched no known species. The drawings in that notebook showed Michael attempting to document his experience, and now the trail camera footage showing what could only be my sons, 7 years older but unmistakably alive, walking companionably beside a creature that shouldn't exist, but clearly did. I returned to those woods every month after receiving the trail camera footage, equipped with my own cameras and the knowledge I've gained about these creatures and their behavior patterns. Over 7 years of intensive study, I've learned to recognize signs of their presence. Trees twisted at heights no human could reach, stick formations that appear deliberately arranged, areas where the normal sounds of forest life fall unnaturally silent. I built a cabin in the forest 2 miles from the clearing where the footage was captured. It's a simple structure, 4 walls, a roof, and windows that face the endless expanse of trees where my sons have made their home. I spend most of my time there now, having resigned from my job and sold the house where we used to live. My savings allow me to dedicate myself fully to this search, to this vigil that I maintain in hopes of seeing my sons again. 4 times over the past 7 years, I've had what I believe were direct encounters. The first was just a glimpse of something enormous moving through the trees about 60 yards away. The figure was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, walking upright. It paused, turned slightly, and I swear it looked directly at me for just a moment before disappearing into the underbrush. The second encounter involved finding fresh tracks near one of my cameras, prints that appeared overnight. The tracks were accompanied by two sets of smaller footprints, human-sized prints that could have belonged to teenagers. These smaller prints showed the same synchronized stride pattern I'd observed in the trail camera footage. That night, from my campsite half a mile away, I heard vocalizations that weren't made by any known animal. Deep, resonant calls that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The third encounter was the most significant. I was checking one of my cameras when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. I turned slowly, and there, about 40 yards away, stood two figures watching me from the shadow of a massive cedar tree. They were human in shape, adolescent in size, but dressed in clothing I didn't recognize. They stood perfectly still, watching me with what I interpreted as curiosity rather than fear. I called out their names, Marcus and Michael, and one of the figures tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost like recognition. But before I could approach, something enormous moved in the shadows behind them, and the two figures turned and melted into the forest. The fourth encounter happened just last year. I was hiking along a ridgeline when I came upon a clearing that showed obvious signs of habitation. There were shelters arranged in a circular pattern around a central area. In the center of the clearing, I found items that stopped my heart. Two small stones, flat and smooth, arranged in a pattern I recognized immediately. It was a design the twins had invented when they were 5 years old, a simple symbol they used to mark things that belonged to them. No one else in the world knew about that symbol. I stood in that clearing for hours, calling their names. The forest remained silent, but I had the unmistakable sense that I was being watched, evaluated, and ultimately judged as someone who could be trusted not to cause harm. The evidence continues to accumulate. Last spring, I found a structure that could only be described as a memorial. In a small clearing about 3 miles from my cabin, someone had arranged stones in a careful pattern around the base of a massive cedar tree. Among the stones were objects that made my breath catch in my throat. A small compass, corroded but recognizable as the one I'd given Marcus. Feathers arranged in patterns that matched designs the twins had invented, and carved into the bark of the tree, at a height that would require reaching far above a human head, were two symbols that looked remarkably like the letters M and M. The carving was fresh. Someone had wanted me to find this place, to see this evidence that the twins remembered their names, remembered their identities. I spent 3 days at that site. On the second night, I heard movement in the darkness. I called out their names, told them I wasn't there to take them away, just wanted to see them. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something that made tears stream down my face. Two voices, young and clear, speaking in tandem the way only twins can, saying a single word that I couldn't quite make out. The voices came from no more than 20 yards away, hidden in the darkness. In the morning, I found evidence that someone had approached my campsite. Footprints, 2 sets of human-sized prints and 1 massive set, leading to within 10 feet of my tent before retreating. Near the footprints was a small offering, a bundle of dried berries wrapped in leaves. It was a gift, a response to my words, a communication that meant "I love you too," in whatever language they now spoke. I've made a decision. I'm permanently relocating to this cabin, dedicating whatever remains of my life to maintaining contact with my sons and the creatures that have become their family. I've established a pattern of interaction, leaving offerings of food and familiar objects at the edge of the clearing. The offerings I leave often disappear within days, replaced sometimes with small tokens. I've also been leaving notes, simple messages written on waterproof paper. Last month, I found a response. Scratched into the bark of a tree near where I'd left one of my notes was a crude but unmistakable drawing of 3 figures. 2 smaller figures standing close together, and 1 larger figure standing apart. Above the 2 smaller figures was carved a simple shape that looked like a heart. Above the larger single figure was carved a question mark. I spent the next week crafting my response. Using the same technique, I created my own drawing. My drawing showed the single figure with arms outstretched toward the pair, with a heart carved over all three figures together. I added words in large, simple letters. I love you, not going away, just want to see you, safe, happy, okay. 2 weeks later, I found their response. The same three figures, but now with a line connecting all three. The heart over all three as I had drawn it. And beneath the drawing, scratched carefully into the bark in handwriting that I recognized despite 7 years of change, were 2 words: we remember. I broke down completely when I saw those words, fell to my knees in the forest, and sobbed like I hadn't sobbed since the day they disappeared. They remembered. Despite everything, despite 7 years in the wild with creatures that shouldn't exist, my sons remembered their father. They remembered being loved. From their drawings and brief carved words, I've pieced together their story. They were taken, but not as prey. The creatures recognized something in them, saw them following those massive tracks with fearless curiosity, and made a decision that changed all of our lives. The twins have been cared for, raised alongside what I can only describe as Bigfoot children, learning to survive in the deep wilderness. They've become part of a community that exists beyond human knowledge. I've come to understand that I may never have them back, at least not in the way I once hoped. They're no longer the 7-year-old boys who bounded through the forest in their matching red jackets. They're young adults now, shaped by experiences I can't imagine. But I've also come to understand that I haven't truly lost them. They're alive, they're together, they remember who they were and where they came from, and they've found a way to let me know that the love I've carried for all these years has reached them across the boundary between our worlds. Marcus and Michael, wherever you are tonight, sleeping in whatever shelter your new family has built, know that your father is thinking of you. Know that I'm just a few miles away, in a cabin that faces the forest where you've made your home. Know that I'll never stop loving you, never stop hoping, never stop believing that love transcends any boundary between the civilized and the wild. The search continues. The truth waits in the shadows between the ancient trees, and a father's love remains stronger than the fear of the unknown. Sleep well, my sons. Your father is still here. Your father will always be here. And someday, somehow, we'll find our way back to each other. The forest holds my boys, but it cannot hold my love. I am Richard. I lost my sons to the wilderness, and I will never, ever stop trying to find them again.